All right, everyone,
Okie
we're
doke.
back with here with David List. David, how's it going?
So far, so good. It's it's exciting. Thanks for being on the show. But the book is coming out tomorrow.
Yeah,
Is the
yeah,
pub date? So all things considered, I'm excited. I hope it does well. I hope people enjoy it, and so overall, I can't complain.
yeah. Let's talk about that here in a minute. But first, I want to give you a quick introduction. You've spent a lot of time in TV and film production. You got a new movie that's coming out that you're an executive producer on.
Uh,
And,
it actually was out.
oh, it's out already.
Um, yeah, it was unfortunately, you know, uh, in terms of its release, another victim in the film business of, really the remnants of COVID.
Ah, gotcha.
Um, but, most people above a certain age, I would say most people who are above the age of probably 45 to 50, remember the first Fletch that was made with Chevy Chase,
Okay.
the original. Um, and they were all based on a series of novels written by an author named Gregory MacDonald, who was you know, became a dear friend of mine, and ultimately a client when I went back into representing writers. My general career path wasn't always in production. It started out, and I never really even pursued the entertainment business. Um, I was a graduate of Albany State in New York as a marketing major. Knew more about what I didn't want to do than what I did want to do, and ultimately ended up getting a gig as the chauffeur to the president and CEO of the William Morris Agency in New York. Um, and it was an amazing gig. I mean, I didn't know anything about the business other than they were a huge talent agency. Show
Yeah.
business growing up, reading whatever was on page 6 of the New York Post,
Hmm.
and that was the extent of your showbiz background. The next thing I know, I'm in this. You never drove limos, just they had these two company Jaguars. Um, it's my first day on the job, and next thing I know, I'm in this car with the president of William Morris Worldwide sitting next to me, and in the back seat, although it's probably not fashionable to mention this name today, but in the back seat was Bill Cosby, uh, a big anchor named Barbara Walters,
Yep. Heard of
um,
her.
and a big Broadway guy. Uh, and I spent the next 6 months driving around movie stars, um, and from old timers to the current ones, um, and became an agent there in the TV packaging department uh, in my early 20s, and stayed an agent for a little while. It was really another mentor, the head of the TV department there, who really is the one who was like, you got to go out west if you want to have any shot at a career, because even the TV business was moving out west.
Yeah.
Um, it was New York was getting limited down to really books and the theater. And I finally made the move and stayed an agent for a little while. Then went in onto the production side when I first started working with. I imagine you might remember the name Dodi Fayed,
I feel like I've heard that name
who was
before.
he was the gentleman that was killed with Princess Diana.
Okay.
In Yeah, um, that was my first job in production. Was working with Dodi in his new company out here, a new company he was being given over the movie Hook, which was Steven Spielberg's movie Hook with Julia Roberts and Robin Williams. But the Fayed family had their tentacles into the rights of Peter Pan, the original novel Peter Pan, which is, the rights are actually owned by the Ormond Street Hospital in England, a very old children's hospital. And that's how Dodi ultimately got involved and got this new company. And I worked with Dodi for a couple of years, and then ultimately went from there. Then started working with another sort of legendary guy who unfortunately passed away a few months ago, Al Ruddy. I think the first movie Al made was The Godfather. which he won the Oscar for, and his body of work over the years was just
pretty big movie.
Yeah, it could become a hit if it does well, if it catches on.
You never know. I mean, some people have heard of
it. You look at some of those classic films he did years ago, between The Godfather, The Longest Yard with Burt Reynolds.
Yeah.
Even creating the TV series Hogan's Heroes. Remember that?
Yep.
And then right up until, much later on in life, a very legendary producer in this town. And then I went on my own after that, about 20-something years ago, to take my shot as a producer, and went back into representing writers as a manager. Some of my clients, when I was an agent, came back to me. In this town, you and your viewers, some might be aware, some not, but if you're an agent, you're prohibited from producing movies by statutes and various laws. Because in essence, the big talent agencies, all they really are in a way are employment agencies, but for people in the creative field.
Right.
So as a movie producer, though, you are those creative elements' boss. So it's a conflict of interest. You can't be an employment agency and their boss at the same time.
Yeah.
If you are functioning as a manager in a managerial capacity, then you are allowed to to produce your client's work, but you're prohibited from finding them work. You cannot procure them work. Only an agent can. You can be a part of that process in conjunction with a lawyer and an agent, but so on and so forth. And it was during that time that I met the author Greg McDonald, the author of the original 11 Fletch novels. And it was not even over Fletch. He had written over 26 novels. Universal, which made that original film in 1985 with Chevy, once a studio makes something, usually they own the rights, and you have the movie rights, and then the novels underneath that are known as the underlying rights. And usually when they make something, they own it, and I figured Universal owned it. But I became a good friend of Greg's and his whole family. It's, in fact, the family. Greg is also, unfortunately, since passed away. The Fletch estate is the only entity I still represent to this day, his widow, Cheryl, and son, Jason. And they're like a second family to me. But it was in 2000, the year 2000, when Greg was like, you mentioned you're going back into managing some writers. How would you like to manage me? And I was like, you're a retired novelist. Well, I was like, at first I was like, you're a retired novelist. What would I be doing for you?
Right.
And he's like, well, I'm sure there's a couple of things we could talk about. And I was like, well, I was a big Fletch fan. It'd be an honor. You'll be my first honorary client. And he said, good, send me your papers. I'll sign them tonight. And on that same call, he said, can we get down to business? I was like, well, sure. He goes, well, I own all the rights to Fletch. I was like, really? I said, you got to be kidding me. He's like, no, I own it all. Universal owns nothing. And I was like, wow. I was like, well, it's either a gold mine or it's worth nothing. Somewhere in between.
Yeah.
And he was like, well, I want you to have it. Take your shot as a producer. Let's make another Fletch movie. I was like, good Lord, man. Within a few weeks, there were 5 studios vying for the rights.
Wow.
And we ended up making the deal with none other, unfortunately, in June of 2000 with Harvey Weinstein.
Oh, that's a tough one. It's a tough break.
It's funny. It's you get that reaction no matter who you mention it to. A film, a high concept kind of a film like Fletch, which has, over the years, it's sort of developed a cult following. I mean, those type of movies historically move through the development process at a studio pretty quickly, otherwise known as development hell, and it can be. I could write another book just about the anatomy of a fuck up, how not to make a movie. But we made the deal with Harvey, and that led to a 10-year waste of life.
Mm.
And Harvey spent millions of dollars, not only on the rights, but on writers that should have never gotten hired, or it just didn't work out, didn't go anywhere. At that time, he and his brother were losing Miramax, which was owned by Disney. Harvey and his brother Bob actually only owned Miramax for 2 years when they founded the company.
Wow.
And sold it to Disney. A lot of people don't know this, but the company was actually named after their parents, Miriam and Max. That's how Miramax the name came about.
Interesting.
So we went through that, and we extended him. We had, because the rights were sought after by a number of people, you could always make a better deal that way. And no matter how much money he spent, or even if he owned the rights, we still had what's called a reversion clause, that if he didn't make the movie by a certain amount of time, he lost all his money and the rights. And we would extend it as a courtesy because he did have a big investment in it. But after 10 years, we had had enough. And I think at that point, he was running out of money, the company. And I got the rights back. And to show you just how lengthy a period of time, it ultimately took Fletch, it took me 22 years to get it off the ground.
Wow.
After Miramax, I partnered up with big producers to give it a little juice, and we set it up at Warner. This will kind of tie in, because I never pursued writing either in my life. My writer clients used to tell me, I should write, that I just, had kind of, in a way, a natural, although sometimes long-winded, storytelling ability.
Yeah.
But when you're working with your clients, and let me know if I am going on too long-winded here with this.
No, you're fine.
When you're working with them in the development process, it's a very different point of view, and they used to say, you're more like a writer. Or I would suggest something and say, that's a better line than what I had, you should write. So we moved Fletch over to Warner Brothers, big producers. They hired a high-priced writer who wrote a script. Took a while for him to deliver, and then that script didn't do it for anybody and got him released out of the project a few weeks thereafter. And the project was, as they say now, dying on the vine. Warner Brothers had spent a lot of money for the rights, but a lot of money relative to the studio. They were like, what are we going to do now? Get another writer after this guy? So at that point, I was running out of money. And, because when you're a producer on a film, you don't ever get paid until and if the movie gets made. Okay. And you can work on something for years and it doesn't happen. So I holed up and rethought the movie myself as a producer. Came up with a whole new take, figured, man, if I at least did some of the heavy lifting, maybe Warner Brothers would throw me a few bucks to option or buy the story from me. Yeah. And then they could just get a writer that everybody likes and, just write the script. To kind of cut to the chase, initially everybody from my producing partners and the studio executive in charge were like, we love List, but the guy's never written a thing in his life. You want me to go into my boss and tell me I'm going to put my ass on the line? I was like, but in essence, the other producers and the studios, they did love the pitch. It was really because I represented the underlying rights also, the family, which Warner Brothers had spent a lot of money on. And like I said, that first writer ate up a lot of the clock. With their support, I offered Warner Brothers the opportunity to reset the clock for free under the condition they let me write the script. And they stubbornly agreed. They were like, all right, but we're only paying you for a rewrite, since there was another writer before you. It was like, all right. Well,
okay, fine.
And I wrote it, and it's kind of like, what are the odds? I mean, and it, in a way, altered my path. Because on one hand, I wrote it, and when I delivered it, I got a call from the studio exec and my producing partners, and they were like, List, man, you blew us away, dude. You can really write. You got a nice touch. I mean, you hit all 10 tenets of what it needs to be a Warner Brothers movie. It's already been approved to go to directors. So you're thinking, damn.
All right.
Well, there were 15 names on their approved directors list. Of the 15, 12 of them weren't available for about 2.5 years. The other three were never going to do the movie, nor were most of the ones that were unavailable. Every studio has their own way of making a film. And I try to tell this to young, kids just getting in the business now. Once you have your project set up in a major studio, on one hand, it kind of gives the project a little bit of legitimacy. You're at a major studio. It's a signal to agents that there might be some money down the road, with this thing. At the same time, that studio can also become your biggest obstacle to ever getting it made. Warner Brothers wanted to make Fletch for $100 million. That's what they do. They make $100 million movies. And they wanted to do it with one of their people, Brad Cooper, Channing Tatum, directed by Todd Phillips, who did the Hangover movies for them.
Yeah.
You don't get that type of combo with their people. It doesn't interest them. And none of them were ever going to do it. There was one actor that read it. I don't know, are you familiar with Jason Sudeikis?
Yes.
Jason read it. And again, this is going back. This was on the heels of another film he had done with Jennifer Aniston called Where the Millers.
Yep, I remember.
And it was made for about 25 million bucks by New Line, which Warner Brothers owns. And it made a bundle, like 350, 400 million, something like that. So we thought, all right, Sudeikis, great. We took a few meetings with him. Warner Brothers finally met with him. And then the next day in the trades, big announcement, Jason Sudeikis on board as the new Fletch for Warner Brothers, right? And shortly thereafter, they killed the movie. And it was like, when I confronted them, it was like, they love Jason, but, they like him in that $25 million, $30 million movie, not at $100 million, which is what they wanted to do. And ultimately, the long and the, but they're obviously, they do love him by Hollywood standards. And ultimately, it didn't get made there, but at that point, the script was now out in the industry, because they were looking for direct. And so I got signed myself as a writer by a big film agent. And other producers were now reading the script. I was getting called in everywhere. What else are you working on? We loved your script. What else are you doing? Will you take a look at this? Take a look at that. And it sort of changed my life now in writing. And I went right into another project for Fox. And then ultimately, COVID hit. And, that's when I really thought, this thing called What Are the Odds came about. And, it's, as I say, who hasn't said that at some point in life? What are the odds, man?
Yeah, everybody said that.
That's right. When I asked the question, who hasn't said that? The answer is nobody. That's who.
Yeah, nobody.
And I just started to think about, it's like this thing with Fletch. Who would ever believe that out of nowhere I'd get this opportunity? I'd never written anything. Now to be writing a script for a major studio. The odds of things like that are incalculable. And it just started to raise the question for me in my own life, when the odds of something happening are so astronomical that they're incalculable, is it irrational to not write it off as coincidental or something? And it's really spectacular. And I would imagine, if I'm not mistaken, I did have a chance to look up a little. You have a military background, Air Force, if I'm not mistaken.
I do.
Yeah, well, again, without hope, the risk of sounding cliche, man, thank God for people like you.
Oh, appreciate it.
And I mean, it's I'll never forget. I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I forget who gave this speech. It was just years ago, and it was really incredible. It was like, if you can do this, if you can read, there's, thank a teacher. If you can do this, thank this person, right? And it went on, and at the very end, it was like, and if you do it in English, thank a soldier.
Yeah, yeah, I've seen that too. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it just stuck in my brain. Um, so it really kind of went from there. And, I don't know to what length, you're familiar with the book. The three characters in it. One is a former NYPD detective. I'm originally from New York City. My dad was actually in law enforcement for a little while.
Oh wow. So you,
Um,
so you kind of connect to the character a little bit.
yeah, he was not with the police, but he grew up in a very pretty tough, poor section of Brooklyn, Brownsville, Brooklyn. Um, and like he said, half the guys he grew up with became mobsters. the other half became the other half became special agents working undercover because they got a medical plan. It was like getting health insurance was the dividing line for some as to what side of the law you ended up on.
Hey, that's why
And
I
I didn't
joined the
even do
military because I got benefits. It was better than working at Sears at the time. So
absolutely, yeah. So selling selling copy machines,
yeah,
for
selling
Xerox.
refrigerators and lawnmowers and wrenches was what I
It's
was
true.
selling. It was about as good as it got. I was like, hey, this isn't gonna work. I need some medical, I need some benefits, I need some education. So yeah, that's why I joined. So I don't blame them.
Absolutely. I mean, and again, I ended up knowing, a number of cops, um, and it's again, same holds for them, for those that enter the military. That's probably why many, if not most, cops have a military background.
Yeah, yeah,
It's
it's
just
very
a
similar.
crazy, yeah, crazy, you know, what they, what, what people in the military, what they put up with when they are confronted in those crazy experiences.
Yeah,
It does
some
take a
crazy
very
stuff.
special kind of,
Oh
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
special kind of.
The structure, the discipline, the organization, the camaraderie, the brotherhood. Like, I mean, I myself,
Absolutely.
I debated on, joining a law enforcement agency when I first, left the military, and I thought maybe that's where I need to go. Maybe that's a spot that'll give me those same things, maybe not beating the streets, walking the streets or patrolling, but like, with all these agencies, they have all these different support divisions and different other jobs you can do. So I looked at the FBI, the CIA, a bunch of other three-letter agencies, and just said, maybe this is a place that I could still fit in. And I work for the Air Force now as a civilian, but um,
Yeah,
it's very similar, law enforcement and a lot of these different agencies to the military.
absolutely.
And that's where we find ourselves. I want to rewind it just a little bit because I want to find out how the movie got made and you landed on Jon Hamm.
Ultimately, the project, like I say, now we were Warner Brothers. The whole thing that happened with Sudeikis, studio executives were changing. The president of production at Warner's was out. Uh, Another executive was taking over. All that type of stuff. Um, so ultimately, the project was nixed. It took but Warner still had a long time left on the option on the book rights.
Yeah.
So I was like, oh. So it took about 8 months of begging, and they finally said, all right, List, we love you. Go with God. If you can find another buyer, have them call business affairs. We'll send over a cost run. Studios do buy shit from each other. It's not uncommon. Let's put it that way. And when that happens, one business affairs lawyer at the new studio will contact the business affairs lawyer at the other studio, make them aware they want to do this. The other studio will send over a cost run, it's called, which details how much money they're looking to get paid back. And it could be everything from every penny they spent on their overages to unions, the guilds, and all that. It could be overhead charges, all that. And it's negotiable. They negotiate with each other. Some of them have even like reciprocity type of deals. Another studio, which is called a mini studio. We moved it over there. They had read the script, loved it. They knew that if they wanted to make the movie, they'd have to pay Warner Brothers back the amount of money they spent if they made the movie. So they loved it. They spent a lot of money on the rights to the family for the novels. And they were now paying me to do a rewrite on the script just to get the budget down because they wanted to make the movie for a maximum of $25 million.
Wow.
4 months into that deal, and thank God it was only a 1-year deal. They had 1 year with which to make the movie or they were out. But 4 months into the deal, the studio files bankruptcy, the largest bankruptcy in entertainment history. Relativity was the company. Ryan Kavanaugh's company, Relativity.
Wow.
So, man, crazy, unreal.
Yeah.
And at that point, like I say, it was 10 years with Harvey, a couple of years more at Warner Brothers. Now this happened. So when we got the rights back, we then set it up at the new Miramax because Harvey and his brother were gone, long gone. We set it up at Miramax and loved the script, but we were now with the family's approval, they were now paying me to rewrite my feature script as a TV series, as a 1-hour pilot with several episodes. So now I'm the executive producer, the writer of the pilot, and I represent the estate. 3 months into that deal, the CEO of Miramax leaves. Good Lord.
Here we go again.
Once that happens, everything is on the bubble once that happens.
Sure.
But we continued to work on the script, and they knew, now like any literary material, the novels, screenplays, it involves copyright law on everything that anybody writes, right? And then before a studio will ever move to production, or even actually, before they do it, they do a title clearance search. They want to make sure the chain of title is clear. So Miramax at this point knew that if they wanted to make this project, they would eventually have to buy my script and pay Warner Brothers back because Warner Brothers owned the draft I wrote for them. They'd have to pay Relativity or the bankruptcy court back to purchase the draft I wrote for them in order to get the chain of title all under one roof and have it cleared.
To have it cleared. Yeah, it's kind of like buying a car. It goes from
exactly
person to
right.
person. You want it to have a clear title that way. It's very clear who the owner is now. It's legit.
That's exactly right. No liens, nothing, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And so we just figured, all right, well, so we continued, me and the executives I was working with, we continued sort of loosely working on the project. It was about 8 months before a new CEO came in, a gentleman named Bill Block. And I had known Bill a little bit over the years. But when a new guy comes in, especially if it's the new studio boss, stuff is going to change. And within about 10 days of getting there, he had fired the entire staff of the studio. Everybody I'd been working with, gone.
That's one way to clean house.
One way to clean house. And a lot of times, whatever projects, the 200 they could have in development at that time, they'll shit can them and tell people they can have them back. Just if anybody else wants to make it, have them call business affairs and we'll send over a cost run. Because from a new guy, a new boss, it's kind of a no-win proposition if you continue on those projects. Because if they end up getting made, it'll be the old regime that gets the credit. But if it ends up being a bomb, you're the one that's going to take the hit.
Yeah, it's a lose-lose.
Right. It's potentially a lose-lose. That's right. But ones that they really feel could be a franchise, and then that they want to keep. Say, Bill wanted to keep Fletch. He loved the original. It's another potential franchise. You could keep making them, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So he knew the deal about Warner Brothers, Relativity, and he wanted to move on the project as a TV series at that point. What happened then is their business affairs lawyer then reached out to Warner Brothers. Hey, we're going to do this. We own the rights to the underlying rights now to the novels. We're going to try to make this sucker as a TV series. What's it going to cost us? Can you send over a cost run on, we want to get, we're working off David List's script. What's it going to cost? when that happens, the lawyer at Warner Brothers, he doesn't have just the outright authority to go ahead and make the deal. He sends a notice out to the feature film production division that an offer has come in to acquire this script. And once he gets their authority to do it, and they sign off and say, yep, go make a deal, he then can do it. In this instance, since Miramax notified them they want to do it as a TV series, he has to notify the feature division where the script was developed and the TV series and the TV division that this other studio contacted them. Well, the Warner Brothers TV division said, wait a minute. We love Fletch for TV.
Time out.
It was basically Miramax, bend over because this is going to hurt. They basically they wanted back in on the project and take it over. They were like, this is what we do. Miramax, we own this script. If you want to do this, it's going to become a Warner Brothers series. We'll give you a credit and a fee, Miramax, but we're going to have full create. It was awful. Now you have the new CEO of a studio you're with, and this is what's happening. And it put me in this weird position now where I have a responsibility to the estate of the Fletchites to do what's in their best interest because I represent them. And now all of a sudden, my script was now the obstacle to it getting made because Warner Brothers and Miramax were now at loggerheads. It was in limbo. And this went on for months until I couldn't take anymore and it wasn't right to the family, though they would have supported whatever I wanted to do. But I was, as I say, fletched out at that point. I had been on this thing now nearing 20 years, 20. So I contacted Bill. We met for a drink, and I explained to him, that I'd be willing to step aside, take an exec producer role. You can tell Warner Brothers you're not interested and take your shot, though it means you got to start over. And he couldn't believe it. He was very appreciative because I could have just waited him out and gone back to Warner Brothers myself.
Yeah, you could.
And I didn't want to do that. It's not like we had the greatest experience at Warner Brothers either.
True.
And but I looked him in the eye and I said, I'll do it under, because it was heartbreaking to me, candidly. I mean, at that point, like I said, I was very close with Greg. The project was in my blood. And I invested so many years of my life in it. So to now back out completely, it was not easy.
Yeah. Tough one.
And I said, I'll do it under one condition. You're the boss. You control the purse strings. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that you personally will do whatever it takes to get this movie made. Because normally studio bosses, they're not involved in the day-to-day development of material. They just, they got executives they're going to hire or that are already there that'll do that sort of stuff. And it'll eventually move up the ladder till the trigger needs to be pulled. But he looked me in the eye and said, you've got my word. I will personally, And he lived up to every word of that. A lot of people, again, who aren't in the industry, or I tell this to, again, also maybe young kids who are getting in the business. Sometimes even when your project is set up at a studio, it's no easier for them to even get it made, even though they're the ones with the money. Because to make a movie, it costs so much freaking money if you want to make it at a studio level. So there's very few people, actor-wise or director-wise, that they're going to approve that will trigger them to then put up 25, 30, 40, 50, $200 million. It's not like these studios have the money laying in a bank account somewhere. They borrow it from banks like anybody else. So they're paying interest on enormous sums of money. That's why a film that costs, $100 million, on top of that, once it's done, they're going to have to dump in another $100 million for what's called P&A, to strike the prints and to advertise it around the world. There's a lot of bus benches out there, a lot of billboard signs and TV commercials. Mm-hmm. So that's, at the end of the day, that's all they care about. Who's the face that I'm going to be able to stick on TV for 30 seconds and have a shot at getting my money back?
Right.
So they're into it. If it's 25 million, they'll be into it for 50 million. If it's 100 million, they're into it for 200 million. by the time the movie comes out, because that money is being spent for the year they're even making the film. $100 million film probably has to take in, 400 or 500 million bucks just for them to break even. Because they're not, when the public hears, the box office, the film took in $80 million on its opening weekend. Well, the studio doesn't get all that $80 million. Everybody's got to get paid. The theaters, everybody. So if they're getting a sliding chain of maybe 50 cents on the dollar, 40 cents, 30 cents, while the interest is compounding. I always say the movie business is actually not a business. It's just a town of gamblers.
Yeah,
and everybody's
like gambling.
It's one big craps table. And you got a bunch of people standing around it thinking the next role is going to be the hot one. The audition I go on and get the part. The script I write that sells for $1 million. The movie I make that wins an Oscar. And most people hang around the table and make a few bucks here and there. But in the end, most seven out and disappear into the woodwork, and new people show up. And every once in a while, you're at that table for that hot role, and the stars align, it becomes a hit, and people cash out large. And that's really what them going to the next and the next and the next. Otherwise, it's a very difficult grind, more so if you're on your own. Like any other business, there are salary positions that, you're a salaried person and you have a steady paycheck and the benefits. When you go off on your own, it's pure risk.
Yeah. And
you better be willing to pay the price. And I've paid it. I'm still paying. For anyone that reads ultimately, just to finish your question, it was 2021, I believe it was, when I get a call from Bill, or even maybe 2020. He's like, hey, I ran into Jon Hamm. I think it was at a film festival. I was somewhere we ran into him. It was like type of things were still getting back in the flow because of COVID. The movie business, though, was still really, theaters were just like dead. But I ran into Jon Hamm. The guy, he loves Fletch. I was like, well, Jon, man, he's a terrific actor. I wish I knew that 15 years ago, man. And ultimately, he made the deal. And Jon came on board as a producer. At that point, there was nothing. It was just the novels, no script, nothing. But Jon came on board as a producer with his manager, Connie Tavel. And to his credit, which a lot of actors at his level would never do. Most actors are not going to put their name, or their agents won't allow them to do it, out there like that, because they work very hard, and often years, to get their name up to a level where they don't just have to read scripts all the time. They only read it if there's a firm money offer,
right,
for pay or play attached to it. Because God forbid the movie doesn't get made, it could tarnish their reputation.
Right. And
other buyers might go, oh, wait a minute, maybe he's not worth as much as we thought. To Jon's credit, he put his name out there as a producer and contacted the director, Greg Mottola, terrific director. Ironically, it was COVID that actually enabled the movie to get made even. It was COVID that was the only thing that had Jon and Greg available at the same time because there were other projects that were canceled.
Right.
So then, again, a writer came on board. Ultimately, and they went in a different direction than I was going when I was the writer. But the long and the short of it is, it ultimately got made in 2021, I believe it was. Terrific cast. Miramax put up $25 million to make the movie, where it ran into, like I said, the reviews across the board were great. Paramount Pictures was the distributor. Miramax was financing. Paramount was distributing it. But they were going through their own turmoil. Paramount is right now, it was up for sale. So the deals are being made now for new buyers to come in and take it over. And the problem also was the demographic on the film was a little bit older. Jon was getting middle-aged, Jon Hamm, as was much of the cast. And COVID changed the business. Anybody that was over a certain age, even late 30s, they were in no hurry to go back to movie theaters. There was still this great COVID fear that was inflicted on the country. And on top of that, they also got very used to, during COVID, of all now watching their new 70, 80-inch TVs and sound systems, and the sound quality is as good as the theater, and they were no longer paying $20 for a thing of popcorn. And they got used to that. And they could easily have friends over, and their kids' friends over, and all watch the movie. And
it's a bargain. It's a way better deal than, even if you pay $20 for the movie to buy it or to rent it, you can pay, because you can pay that now. They send them out early. $20 to rent it. 4 people get to watch it on your couch. That's cheaper than tickets. It's cheaper than popcorn. It's cheaper. You can kill $100 at a movie theater. Well, I can buy it for 20 and order some pizzas or order.
That's right.
Dinner.
The entire family can watch it for that one ticket price.
Yeah,
that $20.
Exactly, at home. And I know that doesn't do movie theaters any justice, and that hurts business. But
yeah, no. It forever, at least
COVID
in the near future, changed it. A bunch of theater chains have already filed bankruptcy.
Oh yeah, mine closed here in town. Yeah, we lost it. It was 8 screens. It wasn't very popular. It wasn't really that well maintained anyway. But it was still a theater that we could go to if you wanted to see a brand new movie that was coming out. But that was the nail in the coffin for it. I was like, yep, it's closing. It's done. There's no reason to keep it open now. It's just going to struggle and die anyway. So, yeah, but
brutal.
A lot of theaters are struggling because nobody, people couldn't go in. And if you could go in, depending upon your state, you had to sit 4 or 5 seats away from anybody in every direction, so there's 20 people in the theater for a brand new movie, if you could even watch it. And, you had to wear your mask, and nobody wants to do all that when they're trying to sit there and enjoy themselves. Like, they just don't want to do it. But it killed even the biggest movie theaters were struggling. They just shut their doors and said, we're just going to have to lay people off and try again later on when this is all over with, because
very tough.
You can't, and state laws made it impossible.
It was brutal. Hopefully something like what happened will never happen again.
Yes.
And you then also factor in the advent of things like Netflix, Amazon Prime, also having a major impact on theater-going people. So, I'm thrilled it got made, but it never really had the chance it could have had to be a big film.
Yeah.
And, the studio, Miramax, they're not going to do another Fletch film with Jon, but we are now actually negotiating with them to now develop Fletch as a TV series.
Okay.
So we'll see if those negotiations kick out and materialize, but by all accounts, they should. So we'll see. And that's how the film came about.
That's awesome.
Bill Block, Bill, like I say, put his, as a studio head, always said if I had the money, I wanted to try to find some artist, like these bronze busts people do. I wanted to get some guy to do one of just a big pair of brass balls, give to Bill, because that's what he showed to put up $25 million on this movie at that time, and really risk it all, knowing the theaters were dead.
Yeah, it's tough.
But he had given his word and
made it happen.
He did it.
Let's talk about your book and how you got. What was the decision like for you to say, okay, I'm going to sit down and write a book?
Usually it's that last look at the bank account and you're like, holy fuck, what the fuck am I going to do now?
This is a good idea.
And, I actually initially personally wrote it as a screenplay, but there was just so much more to it that I had to leave out because it's a screenplay. You can never, you only have a certain number of pages that it can't go really beyond. Rigid 3-act structure. You can never write what's going on in a character's mind because you can't film it.
Yeah.
Time works differently. And I thought, let me at least try. And I got to tell you, it was brutal.
Yeah, it's hard writing a book.
Holy moly. There was a famous author or director, maybe, John Huston, who once said, writing is easy. All you got to do is sit down and stare at a blank page until your eyes bleed. And it's the truth.
Yeah.
It's enormously difficult. It not only, requires, some modicum of God-given ability to write in a way that is, relatable to other people and engaging, at least you hope it is. But you also have to have, depending on the plot structure, you have to have a very analytical mind of where you're at, because it takes a long time to do. And there are times where life happens and you got to step away from it for a little while. And then when you go back to it, you're like, where the fuck am I in this thing?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I have absolutely no idea. I don't know if you can see, I have that whiteboard back there.
Yeah. Yeah, I got one too right here. You can't see it. It's out of frame, but I mean, it has all my ideas on it and where I'm at and what to do next, because, when you have multiple projects going on, or you get an idea and you start drafting it and writing it down, because even in publishing, you don't know what you're going to pitch and what's going to catch on and who's going to take what. So you don't want to pass up an idea that you come across because it could be it, So, but you have all this stuff working and I have a podcast schedule over here, live shows that I'm developing, and then book stories that I'm developing that are in edits. And it's like trying to remember all that. It's hard for a guy like me. I'm not the smartest man in the world, but writing it all down is got to make some kind of sense.
Yeah, you don't necessarily have to be sort of the academically smartest guy, but just to do that, even when you look at your background in the military, subconsciously, you have to have a very analytical mind to know where all the pieces are and what pieces might be ahead of you, because it can kill you if you don't. It's kind of just like that. So when you're dealing like you are in multiple formats between podcast shows, books, each requiring a whole different skill set and where you're at, let alone when you have to step away from something you do right thinking about as a book to then do podcasts, so that by the time you go back to the book, it's like, where am I in this book?
It's tough.
It becomes very tough.
It's tough.
I would just, it's like some of the old cliches, in What Are the Odds, like I say, all three characters, this former NYPD detective, a former Marine, but he's been unfairly let go from the force and stripped of his pension. The second guy, Wilbur Bailey, is well, again, without boring you with too much detail, basically, like I say, Ray is stripped of his badge and his pension. Middle-aged guy in his late 40s. Never in his wildest dreams, though, did he ever think he would ever get a second chance to get back together with his second ex-wife. Not in a million years.
Right.
But when she opens the door to do it, he uses a good portion of what's left of his savings, and he goes all out with a romantic getaway in Costa Rica. And this time, he personally vows, that he's going to get it right. Nothing. I was talking to somebody about this a little earlier today. I think one of the great misconceptions in life is when you hear somebody say, it's just your job. It's not who you are. I think that's a load of bullshit. I believe your job is exactly who you are. And the reason why a lot of people are miserable in their jobs is because they're in jobs that don't really reflect who they really are. One of the things you'll find with law enforcement, military, it's who they are.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's like Ray, like I say, and I knew cops. I would have actually, and I would have, I don't want to date myself, but I probably would have been a little ahead of you. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a pilot, and I was going to do the Air Force, the whole deal, and then hopefully, but without dating myself, you couldn't be a pilot, a commercial pilot, unless you had 20/20 vision with no eye defects. I got to wear contacts since I'm like 13. That scratched that, and it was a drag. So anyway, Ray sets it up. This time he's getting it all right, so he thinks, and it's a beautiful weekend when a chance encounter in the hotel elevator with Wilbur Bailey, a wily, I think this is on the jacket cover, neurotic, environmentally conscious, fugitive with a $5 million bounty on his head, steps onto the elevator. And the book is also, at least from what I've been told, and I'd like to think that it's also very funny. It's a lot of humor. It just actually got a great Kirkus review. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Kirkus.
Yes, big deal.
Which I understand is not easy to get.
No.
They can be very tough to understand.
Yes.
And the last line of the reviewer was, "This is an outrageous and outlandish comic thriller."
Yeah. I read it too. I think your publicity team sent me a bunch of the reviews. And
great.
Yeah, this is. Saw the Kirkus review. You had a couple other good ones on there too that I was like, man.
Yeah, one from a former detective, detective sergeant.
Very interesting.
Which was also a real honor, because you want to make sure that what you're writing comes off as authentic, and it's
especially in this genre. You're doing
absolutely
military, law enforcement, crime. There are those people out there that know it all, quote unquote.
And if not,
slip up real quick.
And you have to also be willing to know what you don't know.
Yes.
And it took, I'm just by nature also, because authenticity is just really important to me. I couldn't even tell you how many hours, if not months, of research on little stuff. I mean, just endless research, excuse me, to make sure you get it right.
Yeah.
And as you can know, having looked at the novel, there are these backstories, that all go back in time, and you want to make sure you get that right.
And not lose the reader too while you flash back and make it very clear that you're flashing back for a purpose, and then move the story. That also moves the story forward though, because one of the biggest things they tell you is don't time hop, because you'll lose them.
You're right.
You got to be careful with that.
When Blackstone Publishing, the publishers on this, when they lined me up with an editor, a gentleman named Dana Isaacson, who's worked with probably over 24 best-selling New York Times best-selling authors, he really lovingly pounded me on issues like that. Don't forget what if you're going to lose somebody in a novel like this, it's going to be on one of these backstories that they either get bored. So you got to keep that story going, and every one of those stories in some way has to be linked to furthering that story along.
Yes.
Why the characters are doing what they're doing, how they got to be who they are. And it is not, it's also, this type of plot structure, as it's very difficult.
Well, no, because as authors, as storytellers, we naturally want to tell the whole story. And that is stuff that's way back in here that maybe isn't super relevant, but if it's relevant to us, we're thinking it's relevant to this character. And then you have to think of it. The best piece of advice I ever was given was you have to think of a book as something that they're going to put out there and it's got to capture the reader for all 300 or 400 pages.
Absolutely
If
true.
they close the book, or they feel entitled to close the book in the first 50 pages, you're in deep trouble, because the
Yeah,
chances of them
your
picking it
DOA.
up again could be kind of slim. So you have to be very careful in the way you do things, and I never realized that until I really got into writing. And then I got advice from people who had sold books and editors, and who said, I know why you want to do this, but I'm telling you, you can't. And here's why.
Yes.
And it's like, because you'll lose them. Statistics show, data shows, you will lose them. This will not do good. It could be a fantastic story. It will not sell.
Yep.
People will not read it. You will lose them because of this, even just the smallest little thing. And I thought, that is just the most insane. It's already hard to write a book. And then there's a whole list of some written and some unwritten rules that you have to know and play by.
So true.
Just to
Right
have
down
a
to
shot.
word.
Yeah.
Yeah, word count in the genre, and
Oh yeah.
100%.
Oh, then some
Um,
managing editors, I found out, have their little quirks about them. Like they might be or acquiring editors, I should say, or agents who, I heard one agent say, it was at BoucherCon a couple of months ago in August, say, I will not read a book if it has a prologue. If you give me a
wow,
submission and I open it up and it has a prologue, I won't read it. I'm done. It's dead
that's
on
that's
arrival.
amazing.
I thought, well, see, but I didn't know that. And it's like, well, what
I, I,
other editors and agents out there have those kind of quirks that might be like, oh, like I might have screwed up from the minute I sent it to them just because of the way it was formatted. Like, that's insane. And you have to try to get past all of that to get an agent, to get a book deal, and to actually get published. It's a steep uphill climb, like, and people don't know how steep it is. So like, if you can get published by a major publisher, it's like an act of God.
it's brutal. Like I say, I felt very fortunate given my background, even though I was in the TV department, as a representative and working with writers. I at least had an understanding of how to navigate a bit the system,
Yeah.
and knew how brutal it can be. I knew certain things to avoid. I've never heard that one. I mean, I got to be honest. You're a better man than me on self-control, because my response would have been, wow, thank you for telling me that, because I only have one policy, and that is to never work with an agent who doesn't read prologues. So
Yeah.
thanks for,
My
yeah,
jaw, my
that's,
jaw was on the floor because I was just like,
yeah. How do you respond to that? I mean, it's
I
it's
didn't.
ludicrous.
I heard it and just said, wow, okay. But I've also been told, I've been kind of coached and told, like, your prologue needs to set up the whole story. It needs to have a purpose. If it doesn't, and it's more like a chapter one, just roll in right into chapter one.
That is 100% true.
Don't write a prologue for the sake of writing a prologue because you think, oh, I'm going to write this prologue and I'm going to start narrating how this is going to go. It needs to have a purpose to set up the story, to give people an idea in their head of maybe what's to come. And then when you roll into chapter one, you don't necessarily start rolling it all out, but you're telling the story from the other point of view and it's kind of sweeping it in. And then the prologue makes sense in like act 3 somewhere, and you tie it in later on. But if the prologue makes sense right when you read chapter 1, it's not a prologue. I thought
That is 100% true. Which is why I felt, that what I had really did work, because it does set up the entire tone and piece, and it does tie in later on back into the novel.
Yep.
Yeah, that prologue is really, again, without sounding cliche with some of these, highfalutin literary terms, is really sort of a metaphor for life from my own personal experience. It's when you wake up one day and you're now a bit older, you're in your middle ages, and you look in the mirror one day and wonder, how the fuck did I get here? From where I started. And you're like the prologue, you're at the edge of the abyss. And you're back to you're just totally vulnerable. You're naked and exposed. You got nowhere else, nothing left. And I don't want to give away too much, but like in the prologue, someone confronts them wanting to know if these are the men that robbed you.
Yeah.
That really is that moment. How did I get here? And you start to realize some of the kind of hidden bitterness you might have, all the people that you felt fucked you along the way. Had I not done that, had I not gotten into that damn deal because I needed the money, how different my life would be today.
Yeah.
That other, I don't know why I'm reminded of this, but being in the Writers Guild because of the screenplay stuff. There's a quarterly magazine they put out called Written By that the guild members get. I forget what year it was, but the actor Steve Martin, the old-time actor comedian.
Yeah.
Steve is probably a bigger, if not at least today, a bigger writer than he was an actor. He's got that new show on like Hulu, Only Murders in the Building, which is a big hit.
Yep.
But he was interviewed for that magazine, and he told this story about how, he went on this meeting once to meet with a big movie producer that he had never met before. And when he went into this guy's office, on his desk was a big like candy bowl filled with those straight edge razor blades, and every razor blade had someone else's name on it. Of all the people he had felt that had fucked him over the years, that he was going to one day get back at. So that's what kind of that prologue is. But it also sets up, these two characters and how the hell did they get here?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a bit comedic. Because I wanted, like I say, the project does sort of toe this line of almost reality and absurdity at times. And in some ways, it started to also mimic, in a way, the biblical story of David, of life's valleys and mountains, the trials and tribulations, and how sometimes when you are at your lowest point in life is when the greatest opportunities, or an opportunity that will alter the course. It's why Wilbur in the book, here you have this environmentally conscious, deeply concerned guy, yet when he's at the lowest point in his life, the only job he can get is in the oil business for an oil company. Yep. And, faith is another theme, especially running through this. No one really knows this, but there are actually, I don't know how many, I never really counted, I should count, but numerous biblical references hidden within the prose or dialogue throughout the book.
Wow.
And I always thought it'd be interesting one day if anybody catches that.
Yeah.
It's kind of like stuff that's done in the movie business that people never realize. And I'll give you, for instance, like, I learned this from Ruddy, like even in The Godfather, if you ever go back and watch that movie again, you actually always knew who was going to be killed next. How? Whoever touched the color orange.